Hi everyone, this is Cole, and for my final project, I'll be giving a bit of a presentation and demonstration on Rayleigh-Bénard convection. I'll be going over some of the mathematics and fluid dynamics as a bit of a review first, and then showing you a kind of a cool kitchen demo, which shows the phenomenon pretty well. So first, a bit about how we get to the governing fluid dynamics, which result in essentially Rayleigh-Bénard convection. We start with the conservation of energy equation. There's a good treatment of this in both the Chandrasekhar and the Tamburri books. The conservation of energy equation is given as 3.53 in the latter. We use the internal energy equation and the constancy of thermal conductivity and make perturbation assumptions on temperature and pressure to essentially arrive at this first equation, which I've shown here. After linearizing, we substitute the Navier-Stokes equation, which is equation 5.10 in the Tamburri textbook, and then make the most important step, which is the Boussinesq approximation. There's a great treatment of this in Chandrasekhar in the first chapter there, which you read a couple of weeks ago. And it essentially means that the density variation, which we have in the simplified equation, is only significant in the buoyancy term. So all other terms which have a density variation can essentially be neglected. After we put in some Fourier forms, guesses essentially for the velocity and temperature profiles, we arrive at the eigenvalue equation, which is shown right here, with the Rayleigh number defined according to this equality. I won't go into all of the terms here, but the most important, I think, is beta, and that's essentially proportional to the temperature gradient, which is set up in this system. As just some background, this system which we're trying to describe is a layer of fluid with a temperature gradient such that one edge of the fluid is at a certain temperature, usually higher on the bottom and lower at the top. And there's also a buoyancy, so a gravitational, in this case, force, which is balancing that. And we find from solving this eigenvalue equation that we have the equation for the Rayleigh number given here. This is a relationship with the horizontal wave number. And the result is shown in the textbook. You've seen this plot before. The curve shows this relationship, this solution. And we see that above a certain critical Rayleigh number, there exist horizontal wave numbers, increasing number of these, which yield unstable solutions such that these convection cells will be set up. Below that critical Rayleigh number, all solutions are stable, but above that, we have an increasing number of horizontal wave numbers, which can give some interesting and quite aesthetically pleasing patterns as well. Just a bit of a schematic and then an example of convection cells as they show up here. We see a very simple example of Bénard cells where there's a temperature gradient such that the bottom layer of the fluid is at a higher temperature than the top. And then a physical example of Bénard cells, which is solar granulation. It's not exactly really Bénard convection, but it is an example of Bénard cells, and they come about because of the temperature gradient between the bottom and the top of the convection zone, as well as the buoyancy term, which is provided by gravity and comes into the equations which I discussed. So now kind of a cool demonstration. This first video I'm going to show is essentially a control. So there's a non-heated pan. I've put a thin layer of olive oil in the pan and then sprinkle pepper over just to see what happens when we do that as kind of a control. So again, there's no temperature gradient here. We see that there is a little bit of clumping in the pepper when you sprinkle it over, as might be expected, but nothing substantial, nothing that looks too much like convection cells. So there's nothing really spectacular here, but it does show that the pepper won't clump together, so we can use it as a control for the next case. Now I put a bit of a temperature gradient on. Heat the pan from below just slightly, but other than that, it's the same system as before. And so we have a thin layer of oil in a pan, a very small temperature gradient. Of course, gravity provides the buoyancy force, and we see what happens here. So sprinkle some pepper on, and almost immediately we see these cells show up, which suggests that there are upflows in the middle of these cells and downflows on the boundaries, such that the pepper is forced out and down into the boundaries. There's also, if we played a little bit farther, A pretty strict boundary, which is set up here, these very nice 3 cells right here, show that I think this might be related to the shape of the heating element under the pan. So this is kind of the extent of the heating element, and that might mean that the temperature gradient is higher here than on the outside, though it could also have something to do with the geometry of the pan. But the idea of convection cells is clear. We have a buoyancy force, we have a temperature gradient, and what we get are these cells which show upflows in the center and downflows on the boundary. So this is a good example and a really, really simple way to see what happens in this system. Thanks, everybody, and have a great summer.